Good morning and welcome to our Republican Media Availability. We thank you for joining us today. With us from the House of Representatives, we have House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury from the 31st District and House Republican Deputy Leader Mike Steele from the 12th District. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th District and Senator Drew McEwen from the 35th District and Ranking Republican on the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. With that, I will turn it over to House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury for some opening remarks.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. From the House today, I'm joined again by Deputy Republican Leader Mike Steele. It's been a busy week in the House since we met with you all last week. There have now been 3 initiatives to the legislature certified by the Secretary of State. For all 3, House Republicans made a motion on the floor of the House to instruct the committee to which the initiatives were referred to hold a hearing. We believe that the phrase in the Constitution that says these initiatives to the legislature shall take precedence over all other measures has to mean something, and we're proposing that one way the legislature could satisfy that is by promising public hearings. We don't do that for normal bills, and so by doing it for these initiatives, by promising that hearing, I think we could comply with the constitutional requirement. Unfortunately, for all 3 motions, they were defeated on a party line vote, with every House Republican voting to instruct the committee to hold a hearing, every House Democrat voting to reject that. I think that's disappointing. I think that is contrary to our obligation to attempt good faith compliance with the state constitution. And I've yet to hear a good reason why we shouldn't do it. I've heard folks from the other side say that we shouldn't do it because the committees are busy with other measures, which is exactly why we should do it, to make sure those other measures aren't the ones taking precedence over the initiative. And I've heard that we haven't done it all of the time in the past, which I don't think it's a very good reason to break the law again just because you accidentally broke it once before. I think you should always take the opportunity to do the right thing once it's presented to you. Outside of the initiatives, it continues to be busy with other things. Republicans continue to be focused on fixing Washington and delivering real solutions for our constituents. We are fighting for things like lower gas prices, more police officers, tougher penalties for fentanyl distributors, and higher test scores. Unfortunately, House Democrats are taking a less helpful approach. Their signature bill they've passed so far passed yesterday that would ban new natural gas hookups. Taking that vote in the middle of January, the coldest month of the year, just after we got done with what will probably end up being the coldest week of the year. Shutting off new gas hookups, I think, is part of what is a growing catalog of crises confronting Washington state. We need to be fixing those crises, not making them worse. Banning natural gas would make that worse. So I am grateful for the 6 House Democrats that broke with their caucus, but unfortunately, a number of other Democrats voted to ban natural gas, and I think that does a poor job representing our constituents. So with that, I will hand it over to my counterpart in the Senate, Senator John Braun.
Oh, great. Thank you, Drew, and thank you for everybody for being here this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. I have with me this morning Senator Drew McEwen from the 35th Legislative District to talk about some of the issues that are going on in the legislature this week. I'll just repeat what we've been focused on for the entire session. It's the things we hear from our constituents around the state, and it's their top priorities. It's public safety, and that has to do with, the things going on there. Of course, the initiative, one of the initiatives that Representative Stokesbury mentioned is the Pursuit Initiative that I think few can deny now that has a direct bearing on the outbreak of lawlessness across our state. And while I think the people of the state of Washington will ultimately approve the initiative and restate the reasonable suspicion criteria, I think it would be better if we got on with it quicker inside the legislature and made that change and try to push back on what has been the wrong direction for a couple of years now. Also working, and this one I'm glad to hear is becoming more and more bipartisan on efforts to rebuild our law enforcement community around the state. A lot of work to do there. Some of it funding related, but a lot of it just morale and related and getting law enforcement to believe that they're in a great profession and encourage others to join the profession. Ton of work to do there. Focused on affordability, food, gas, housing, childcare, healthcare continue to be increasingly unaffordable for working Washingtonians. There's a lot of things we can do there. I think the top issues today, I think in voters' minds are, of course, gas prices with the Climate Commitment Act. And again, we have an initiative to deal with that. I'd like to see us deal with it directly in the legislature, but I believe the voters will ultimately deal with it if we don't. And then housing is another area that we focus on quite a lot. And much of it bipartisan. We're certainly willing and have worked in a bipartisan manner, but there's more to do, and some of it's pretty challenging. And it remains to be seen whether the Democratic majorities are up to the big challenges if we're going to get back on track with housing. But a ton of things going on in the affordability space that could make the lives of Washingtonians better. And then finally, how do we work on creating a better future for our children? We've been very focused on learning loss from the pandemic. A couple things going on there, working on chronic absenteeism. We're going to continue to work on grants for school districts to address learning loss with additional education. But beyond that, we have challenges for our kids and not just affordability of childcare, but access to quality childcare, and in trouble with the Department of Children, Youth and Families, and things like the juvenile criminal justice system, which is just broken at this point and causing great harm to the children in our care. And also problems with foster care and child protective services. So a ton of work to do that we should be focused on having to do with children. But again, top priorities, public safety, affordability, and creating a better future for our children. I'll stop there because I know you have great questions that you're more interested in what I'm saying, and turn it back over to John to go through questions.
All right, first, let's go to Jerry Cornfield of Washington State Standard.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. I guess this is for you, Senator Braun, or senators. Last year, you may recall, the Senate unanimously passed a bill to make members of the clergy report child sexual abuse, but with an exception for what they hear in confession. The House disagreed. The bill did not make it. A new version has emerged that seeks to find a middle ground between the two chambers by keeping intact most of that exemption, but clergy would have to warn law enforcement or Department of Children, Youth and Families when they have reasonable cause to believe a child is at imminent risk of being abused or neglected. I just wonder what you think the Senate, if your caucus would be open to that pathway, or is that still a hard or not?
Frankly, I mean, this is a brand new bill. I'm not sure I could give you a definitive answer, Jerry. I think it's an important issue. We thought pretty hard on this last year. And we're as committed to stopping child abuse as anyone, but we do have significant concerns that we are not, forcing clergy into a violation of their sacraments. So I think what you're going to see is us look at the bill. We're going to discuss it with the different religious organizations to see how they feel about it. And then what I think you can count on is that we're going to the extent we can, without violating folks' religious freedom, their protected religious freedom, I might add, we're gonna work with the Democrats to find a solution to this.
Did you have a follow-up, Jerry?
Different topic. I'll switch to the House. There was a bill that moved out of House Appropriations yesterday on independent prosecutors. Another one of those bills that was worked on and debated quite a bit last session didn't make it. Democrats have again tried to come up with a solution, at least for their side. Your side voted no on it, but it appears to streamline the use of independent prosecutors, fewer cases, and it appears to attempt to not violate the constitutional incursion on local control of county prosecutors. Do you have any thoughts? Do you or Representative Steele have any thoughts on what is wrong with that bill at this stage for your caucus?
Yeah, appreciate that, Jerry. I am still on appropriations, so I was there yesterday. I voted no on that bill. I think every other member of my caucus did as well in committee. I think we still do have concerns about the constitutional incursion. Appreciate that folks are trying to address those concerns, but I don't think we think they've been adequately addressed. I think we have concerns about needlessly expanding the scope of the Attorney General's authority. He is not a prosecutor. That is not how the Attorney General operates in our state. It has never operated in that manner. His prosecutorial powers are extremely limited. That was set up 125 years ago, we think for good reason, and we don't want to just needlessly add to his scope just to make ourselves feel good about things. We also are, look at the verdict in Tacoma as evidence that just handing off a case to the Attorney General's office doesn't really fix anything. There are still people hurting on both sides. I think that had that been left with the county, I think it certainly would not have brought back Manny Ellis, but it would have caused less unnecessary pain. So, I think that we're confident that the current process that allows for local prosecutors to make those charging decisions is the best starting point. And if we need to make modest iterations from there, we're open to that. But at this point, we don't see the need, and we see some significant harms that could come from shifting some of that over to the Attorney General's office.
All right, next we'll go to Shauna Salisbury of McClatchy.
Morning. The House, or I'm sorry, the Senate just heard a bill yesterday that would prohibit law enforcement from hog tying individuals. That was heard in the Senate Law and Justice Committee. I'm wondering where each of your caucuses stands on support for that bill to eliminate hog tying.
Well, Shauna, you caught me off guard. I'm not familiar with that bill. So I'm not sure I'm prepared to comment on it. I mean, it seems like on the face of it, it seems like a practice we could, if not eliminate, certainly reduce the use of. But I would tell you, I'm cautious given our experiment over the last couple years with taking tools away from law enforcement and the subsequent impact on crime across our state. So while on the face of it, it seems like a bill that has merit, I would approach it extraordinarily cautiously, knowing that we've done tremendous harm to our law enforcement community and therefore our citizens over the last couple of years by doing things that looked nice on the face then turned out to be bad ideas. So we should be careful what we do next.
Yeah, Shauna, Senator Braun kind of stole my answer as well. I've not seen the bill. Don't know what the current law with respect to that practice is. Don't know how it would be changed in the bill. But I would say caution is needed as well. Yes, on the face of it, seems reasonable. But I think for me and for my caucus, we would want to listen very carefully to what law enforcement officers, the rank and file guys and women have to say about it, what the command has to say about it. And listen to that and respond accordingly. I think, as Senator Brown alluded to, I think we made some mistakes with our changes to policing laws over the past couple of years. I think our failure as a legislature to adequately listen to law enforcement's position and concerns and problems with implementing these bills is a big reason we have such a large public safety crisis confronting us today. So I think I would want to understand how often is this practice used? Why is it used? Are there legitimate reasons when it needs to be a tool? that an officer can use if his back's against the wall, no pun intended. And perhaps are there ways we can narrow its use into and limit it to only when it's really needed? Again, I have some questions, but without knowing what the current law is off the top of my head or having seen the bill, I mostly just have questions right now and not answers.
Did you have a follow-up, Shauna?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Next, we'll go to Laurel Demkovich of Washington State Standard.
Thank you. Good morning. This may be another bill that you have more questions than answers about. Not sure if you've heard of this one, but it's currently being heard in the Senate Local Government Land Use and Tribal Affairs Committee. It would prohibit cities and towns from installing hostile architecture elements, specifically to restrict people experiencing homelessness from sitting or lying on a building or structure. I'm just curious if there are any thoughts at this point in your caucuses on that bill, especially given kind of the importance that you've already talked about with housing and homelessness this session.
Well, as a group, you've obviously been out studying the new bills. I am not familiar with this bill either. Again, I'll speak to the notion. I certainly understand some of the city's desire to reduce the amount of homelessness in their communities and support that. I'm not convinced installing hostile architectural elements, which is a phrase I've never even heard of until this discussion right now, is maybe the best use of resources or time. But I do think it highlights one of the challenges in our state, that we are not giving our cities the tools they need to deal with this issue. We continue to, as a state, focus on this housing first effort that has failed in our state and around the country, instead of focusing on delivering services in a way that most of the folks suffering from homelessness either have challenges with mental health or substance use disorder, and instead of trying to deal with the underlying circumstances, we're just trying to put them in a house and ignore them, and that's not working very well. So I certainly understand the city's frustration, and when it comes to partnering with the state, I'm not sure. Again, hostile architectural elements is the solution. Haven't seen the bill, so I don't know exactly what they're proposing, but on the face of it, it seems like we're maybe headed, they're headed in the wrong direction. But I also be willing to bet if we gave them better tools, they wouldn't be asking this. They wouldn't be trying to do this. I think they're feeling pressure, and we're not giving them solutions, so they're trying other things.
Yeah, I agree with Senator Braun. Haven't seen this bill in particular, but broadly familiar with the concept and can imagine what the bill might entail. Yes, we need to figure out a way to provide more long-term stable housing, but clearly the state and jurisdictions like King County, their strategies have been an utter failure. Every single dollar has been wasted because there's more homeless people now than there ever have been living on the streets of Washington State. And so I think that we need to do a better job giving the cities the tools that they need to deal with it. And there needs to be a two-prong approach. Yes, we need to figure out a long-term solution to provide housing, mental health treatment, substance use treatment for those who need it. Obviously those are co-occurring with homelessness in many occasions. But in the meantime, we cannot just allow our streets to become giant tent cities. There has got to be law and order restored. There has, got to be a prohibition on public camping in sensitive public places like schools, parks, playgrounds, and across the street from those places. So we need a two-pronged strategy where we are developing long-term solutions and building more affordable housing, but and building out our capacity in terms of mental health and substance use treatment facilities. But also we need to have no-go zones, so to speak, and give cities the tools they need to keep the streets clean. And I think our failure to do that is why you are seeing cities and even the state's own DOT placing quote unquote hostile architecture in places. So the legislature definitely needs to step up, and I think banning cities from doing this without doing anything else is definitely going to make the problem worse, not better.
Did you have a follow-up, Laura?
I do on a different topic, childcare. I know that the first week or so of session, both parties had mentioned that that was expanding childcare access and helping the sector was kind of a priority. I'm just curious if you guys can talk a little bit about what specifically you might want to see this year in policy funding wise, especially given that one of the largest pots of funding for early learning and childcare, the capital gains tax, may be up or may be in question if that initiative makes it to the ballot in November.
Well, I just say it's a priorities of government that when you refer to the capital gains tax and the funding issue, I mean, let's just go back for a moment. When the governor was elected, the budget was $35 billion. Today, it's $70 billion. Somewhere along the way, they could have utilized some of that doubling of the budget without increasing taxes to address some of these issues. So I would start there. And everything that this administration and this majority party has done has added to the cost and the regulatory burden. So if we want to talk about affordable childcare, let's stop tacking on more and more and get out of the way and have some flexibility.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, the notion that the capital gains tax is necessary for the state to support childcare is just nonsense, right? We were doing it before we had a capital gains tax. When they used that money from capital gains to pay for this, and they used only the first part of it because of the instability of the capital gains tax, it was just displacing other money that was already being spent. So this is a charade to claim that we can't invest in affordable childcare at the state level without a capital gains tax. Now, what should we do to improve our childcare situation in our state? I continue to think there's two main efforts we ought to work on. One is properly funding state-supported childcare mainly through working childcare connections. Make sure we're paying the market rate, because what happens when we don't pay the market rate is we increase the price for the folks that don't get that help, meaning the folks in the middle, the folks that don't qualify for state support make up the difference because the state doesn't pay their share. We need to pay our share. And I think instead of expanding the number of folks who qualify for that, we should first get to the point where we're at market rate for working childcare connections. The second thing we need to do, and this we're not making a lot of progress on, is we need to get out of the way. And with good intentions, and to a certain extent on a bipartisan basis, some years ago, we changed the standards for childcare in a way that have and continue to make that business very difficult for folks. We need to get out of the way. We need to keep children safe, of course, but we need to stop trying to make it perfect. Because when we do that, all we do is drive up the cost and make it less and less affordable and create less access for folks around the state. Those are the things I think are the right things that we're pushing on. And so far, we're not making a ton of progress, but we're not done yet.
Yeah, I will echo both of my Senate colleagues. It is the unaffordability and unavailability of childcare is one of the many crises facing our state. 63% of children under the age of 5 don't have access to nearby childcare. And even when folks do have access, we are the 9th most expensive state for infant childcare. Clearly we need to do something. I agree with everything Senator Braun said about how the capital gains tax affects funding for childcare services. The capital gains tax will raise, on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But for context, the state budget is about $72 billion, and revenue over this current budget period has increased by about $3 billion since we passed the budget at the end of last session. So, we can easily absorb any hit to the capital gains tax just from the current revenue growth. Not to mention the fact that, as Senator Braun pointed out, the capital gains tax didn't really mean we spent more on childcare. It just shifted how it was paid for. I would also argue that the biggest problem that we have right now is not the need for more funding of state childcare. The problem is the need for more supply and availability of childcare, whether it's paid for with state money or not. And so we have several of our members working on bills to try to increase the supply and availability of childcare. Representative Couture has a bill, House Bill 2179, that would relax licensing and regulatory requirements for childcare providers. Representative Dent has a bill, House Bill 2300, that would try to increase the number of child care providers by creating a pathway for educators to become certified based on their prior work experience. And I don't have the bill number because it was just introduced yesterday, but Representative Jacobson has a bill that would create a streamlined zoning process for childcare centers to be located in cities. And so I think that needs to be something that we focus on really urgently. We really need more folks providing childcare in our communities because, like I said, 60-something% of families don't even have access to nearby childcare. And by adding more childcare providers, you will also begin to bring down the price. And then the one other bill I'll highlight, it's actually from a Democrat colleague of mine, Representative Alicia Rule, House Bill 1716, but is co-sponsored by a number of House Republicans and House Democrats that would provide a B&O tax credit to employers who voluntarily provide childcare assistance to their employees. I think that would go a long way towards helping us solve the problem. And just based on the number of co-sponsors on that bill, I think it would pass if it was brought to the floor. Unfortunately, Democrat leadership seems to be holding that up, but that would be a great way to begin to tackle this problem as well.
All right, next we'll go to Jeannie Lindsay of KUOW.
Hello, good morning. I wanted to ask Senator Braun, you brought up the juvenile justice system specifically. I wanted to ask if you can expand a little bit on some of the issues that you see standing out, and anyone can chime in. Some of the specific issues in the juvenile justice system and what proposals you're seeing that could address some or any of the issues that stand out to you. Thanks.
Sure. So this is a developing problem, one I've been involved with because I have Green Hill in my district, and I can talk about the problems very specifically they're having there, and they have had for a while, and by all indications, they continue to try to cover up, but they have a extraordinarily large challenge with gangs, and their solution, instead of dealing with it, has been to divide the gangs between the different lodging units, so they each have their own fiefdom. I think that's just the wrong way to address it. They have a significant problem with access to drugs. You may be familiar with a warrant that was executed here now, I think a little over a month ago, where they found nearly 2 years of confiscated drugs stored in the facility, and appears by all indications is there's an ongoing stream from a variety of sources, some over the fence, some in some cases there's indication they're being brought in by staff. They got a real problem, and they're not doing much to fix it. And as you can imagine, this is creating a real safety issue for the folks who are being held there. In terms of access to drugs, we've had, I think, now 5 overdoses in the last 2 weeks at Green Hill. These are the types of problems we have. So how do we fix it? It's a pretty simple thing. Some things we've done, we simply aren't being executed. Like we put in a body scanner which was fairly expensive there. And by process, they're sending people around it instead of screening every staff member, every visitor that comes into the facility. They're using it selectively instead of continuously to make sure we don't have an ongoing stream of drugs and paraphernalia coming into the facility. They're making it more and more difficult, some would say impossible, to search rooms for the evidence of drugs, even when there is, evidence that they are present, meaning you can smell marijuana smoke outside the room, but they're not permitted to enter the room to see if there are illegal drugs in the room. These aren't, some of this doesn't require a legislative fix. It requires a DCYF to actually do their job and enforce the rules as they exist, keep these children safe, and put them on give them a path where they can really get, they can re-enter society prepared to lead a normal and healthy life. We are just not doing our job there.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeannie?
No, thank you.
All right, next we will go to John Stang.
Hi, I've got two questions on two totally unrelated subjects. First is on rebuilding law.
I heard rebuilding law. Law libraries.
My computer keeps dropping out. First is on rebuilding law enforcement. Is there any specific bills or any specific programs or proposals that you have? I'm trying to pin you down on going beyond, let's deal with this, to we want to do A, B, and C to deal with it.
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think there's several things going on. The one that's most obvious and has started, as you're probably aware, is expanding the access to training through regional criminal justice training centers. There's two of those that are starting up or have started up. I think there's bipartisan support to doing more of those, and it's a simple formula, right? If local law enforcement can hire folks and train them somewhere close to local, they can do it at lower cost. They have better access, with easier access to training, which means the folks they can recruit, the field just widens. That's a step in the right direction. It's just a step, though. We have more to do that. There's also proposals out there to help fund that. I think currently we pay for 75% of the cost, and the organizations, cities or counties pay for the other 25. There's some proposals in the Senate, or at least one proposal in the Senate for the state to pay for all of that. There's another way we could help. I think those are all important. There's going to be some funding issues at some point. There are many cities and counties who have vacant positions that are not filled. They have the funding. They just have to have recruits to do it. But eventually we're going to get to the point where they fill those positions. At least I hope we get to that point. And they're going to need more funding. There are a number of proposals. I know there's a couple in the Senate carried by Jeff Holy to add additional, there's two options. One is grants to provide money to locals for additional hiring. The other is a sales tax credit that would provide additional funding for hiring law enforcement officers. So far, our Democratic colleagues haven't been super interested in that, although I do think that interest is growing. We saw the governor put $10 million in his budget. Why I don't think that's nearly enough. I think ultimately this is going to be closer to $1 billion problem than a $10 million problem. It's certainly a start and an indication there's recognition that some funding will help. And then there's really hard stuff we can do. Jeff Foley also has this bill that would get after the reasonable officer, reasonable person standard that I've talked about before. We train our officers a certain way to be able to react, to prevent harm to themselves, their coworkers, and to others. And when to do that, they need to react before violence starts, not after it starts. Well, that is pretty obvious to folks who are trained that way. To the reasonable person who doesn't understand that, that's not so obvious. So we have to get back to our standards prior to 2021 that held our law enforcement accountable, but held them accountable to the training they're given, not to some imaginary standard from a person who, may be reasonable in all other ways, but has no experience with law enforcement. So I think we have some things that we're already doing, things that I think we, in terms of training, I think there's some things that we should be doing, and I think we were gaining on that in terms of funding. And I think there's some things right now that the Democratic majority is not willing to do, but will ultimately need to do if we're going to convince law enforcement that they should stay in their profession. And I think even more importantly, encourage others to join their profession. That is fundamentally the hardest problem we have right now, is convincing young folks, our best and brightest, to join the law enforcement profession.
Okay. Second question.
Go ahead. I was just going to, in terms of the House, I don't have a whole lot to add to John in terms of his narrative. I agree with everything he said. I think the bills we would point to, one is an easy thing that's on our plate in two ways right now is the pursuit law. There's another Alicia rule bill, House Bill 1363, that we could pass, or we could pass the initiative. I think that's 2113 that would restore the pursuit law. I think either of those would be a good signal to law enforcement that the legislature has taken their concerns into account and recognized that we as a body don't always get everything right the first time, and we're open to constructive criticism, and we are willing to revisit past decisions to achieve the best results possible. So I hope that the legislature would do either of those. And then in terms of other immediate solutions, further funding to local local governments to fund additional police officers, I think would be really helpful. I have a bill, actually, House Bill 1380, that would just provide recruitment and retention bonuses for police officers in city and county jurisdictions. Then there's another bill introduced this session by Representative Couture, House Bill 2202, that would increase funding to counties for police and also provide funding to counties for indigent criminal defense. So I think either of those would be ways we could get money out in the hands of local jurisdictions so they could begin hiring more officers. But then more broadly, longer term, the narrative that Senator Braun laid out, I think is exactly right, that we need to improve the culture in our state and in our communities around law enforcement so that it is a desirable profession and the good ones stay in the profession.
I just added that one of the biggest things we can do, kind of tags off of what Representative Stokesbury said there, is stop sanitizing crime. This administration and the majority party in the legislature have continued to decriminalize and make the consequences less for crime. And what message does that send? One of the biggest tools we could do for law enforcement is to back them up and enforce the law.
I might add that since Senator McEwen didn't say it, that he's gone beyond, and not only is he working on this in the legislature, his son is he's, I think, justifiably a proud father of a new law enforcement officer.
Yep, correct. Yep, he's in the first class in Vancouver.
Okay, second question is on Cap and Invest. One of the criticisms of Cap and Invest is that farmers in agriculture are not getting the exemptions that they're entitled to. Is there any legislation at all coming from your side to address that?
Yeah, there's been bills introduced by Senator Dozier that address this that go back to last year. I don't have a bill number off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, this was promised in the original Climate Commitment Act that the marine and agriculture industries would be exempt under this, and ecology has given every excuse why they couldn't make it happen. You know, and this is one of the messes with the whole program. Same, you know, on the same token, they can't provide current emissions data, and how do we even know if anything's working? But that's a side item there. So yes, we've had proposals brought forward that have not been heard. And, you know, I think it's the tone deafness of this administration. And again, the majority party to not listen to the folks that are suffering, and for that matter, those that were given exemptions under the original legislation. So, and I think that's one of the reasons you've seen hundreds of thousands of people sign an initiative to bring this to the ballot and have a vote on it.
Yeah, and I would add that as a person whose family is in ag, you know, after meeting with the governor a couple of weeks ago and talking to him about this very issue and asking the question, you know, what about the ag exemption that was promised to, you know, thousands of farmers across Washington state? He seems to think this is pretty well worked out and that ecology is doing their part to make this happen. And of course, as someone who comes from a farming family, a small farming family, that is not the case. If you're able to buy, if you're able to buy tanker loads of fuel, perhaps you can get to the exemption. But if you're a small farm who's trying to make way and still, you know, deal with the lack of an exemption, you're not getting the exemption and you're not able to access it in any form or fashion. And as Senator McEwen said, we have had bills that are still alive that have not had a hearing. And, you know, we expect that we're going to continue to push this issue. If this, if Climate Commitment Act is, you know, was introduced in the way it should have been, and the ag exemption had remained as promised, I think some of the farmers would have a lot less consternation with it than they do.
Are you guys pushing the Dozier bill this session? It's
yeah, I've asked for a hearing on it in our planning meetings for ENET. Yes, and to date, I don't believe we have. I don't believe it's been scheduled as of yet.
Yeah,
and I'll also point out as well, you know, on a year-by-year basis, this can be addressed through the budget. So even if our bills aren't getting a lot of traction, I have not confirmed 100% with our budget leads, but I know it's been discussed, and I expect that we will be during the budget process first trying to work behind the scenes to get appropriations for funding these rebates, and if that doesn't work, I think we'll be proposing amendments to the budget to do it. So, you know, I think we can press the issue in a number of ways, but, you know, I think what's important for us is trying to honor the commitment that Democrats made to the farmers that are mostly in our districts. And unfortunately, those commitments aren't really being honored so far.
Yeah, I would just reinforce, in addition to the Dozier bill in the Senate, there's also a mullet bill, the deal that we've also supported. We're happy, it didn't need to be our name on it to fix the solution. But fundamentally, it's already in law. All right. The law already exists that says the Department of Ecology is supposed to do this. I would encourage, John, you and others in the media to ask the governor for a real answer, not just a breeze over it, but a real answer why they're not following the law. It says very clearly, ecology shall do this, and they have refused to do it.
All right, now we'll go to Carlene Johnson, the Center Square.
Okay, I have two kind of unrelated questions here. First off, Stephanie McClintock has the bill for, I think it's HB 2018, cell phone ban bill in schools. I didn't know, I just kind of want one or two of you could weigh in and just let me know how you feel about that. I've still got one in high school, and I would love for her not to have her phone unless there was an emergency at school, not just to text me from math class. Hey, Mom, how's your day? Yeah. So anyway,
I would suggest that's a great bill. And the education committee did take some tours of my district last year, and we went to Pinnacles Prep, a charter school in Wenatchee, and they have a no cell phones policy, and so the kids will turn their cell phones into the teacher at the beginning of their class, and the teacher stores them in a bin right on her desk. And it works, and the kids are the ones telling us it works really, really well. They're happy to do it because they are focused, they're paying attention, they are having communication with each other and the teacher. They're not distracted by ringing or texting or games that are constantly pulling at their attention. And it works beautifully in those situations. And the kids, again, are the ones telling us they're really excited that they are having to turn in their phones and they haven't missed them. And in fact, they're feeling like they're getting more of an educational enrichment because of that. So I fully support it. I think it's a great bill.
Can't help but wonder if the debates in the Senate and the House would be a little more fulfilling if there was no electronic devices and people actually paid attention.
well, when I asked Senator Wellman about it yesterday, she said didn't really have an opinion about it, would rather leave it up to each individual school district. But just from a parental perspective, I would say teachers are not inclined now to want to take phones away. Some more conservative districts maybe will, do that, but by and large, they are like afraid of taking the kids' phones away. So anyway.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent they need backup. They that's a hard in our today's society to do that. If the teacher's standing alone without backup from the administration, and in this case, backup from the state.
All right, my second question, what do you think the strategy or thinking is of Democratic leadership to not bring any of the 6 initiatives? Well, we've only got 4 qualified, but from your perspective, what is their strategy? And secondly, are you thinking maybe that's better if they do nothing?
Well, I can't speak to what they're thinking. Go ahead, John.
No, go ahead. I will.
Yeah, no, I think we've made our point quite clear that the state constitution is clear on this matter, that these should take priority over everything except appropriation bills. And when you have a large number of folks throughout the state sign initiatives saying something's wrong here, how can you be so tone deaf to not even have a hearing? I get it. You have the majority votes. You're not going to bring these to the floor and have a vote. I get that, right? But have the hearing, for crying out loud. You have people that are legitimately suffering economic hardship, having law enforcement issues because we can't enforce the law. And the citizens of the state have had enough. How can you be so tone deaf to say, nope, don't want to listen to it? That just baffles me. And you look at, we take the time to hear Smokey the Bear license plate. You can't listen to an initiative that 400,000 plus people signed onto. Come on. To suggest that it slows down other legislation, again, it just comes down to priorities and being tone deaf, in my opinion. So have the hearing and move on from there. And I get it. If you don't want to bring it to a vote, that's fine. But at least allow the people to have a legitimate voice in this process for which they're screaming for.
Yeah, Drew's answer was, I think, spot on, and I think, and I can't, again, I can't read the minds of the majority any better than he can, but I think that their desire is to paint all these as is pulling back progress from their perspective, and they don't want folks to understand what's in the bills and what it would do for them and their families. And hearings will bring that out. So the more they can do to keep the lid on people understanding the initiatives, it's better from their perspective and getting them rejected. And of course, our perspective is just the opposite. We want people to have the opportunity to hear about these, understand them, and understand what they do for their families and their communities. Because if we think that if we don't get a vote in the legislature, I tend to think Drew is right, they won't. Then the people will understand what they're voting on when they come before them in November.
Yeah, I can't speak with any first or second-hand knowledge of their strategy. You know, I can only try to deduce it, but I think that it's a penny wise and pound foolish approach. You know, from their standpoint, I assume that the reason they don't want to draw attention to these is because they all represent referenda on their policies. And right now, the initiatives are very popular. But part of why the initiatives are so popular is there's a number of our constituents that think their voice just doesn't matter anymore, and they're just getting increasingly frustrated. And so, you know, yes, Democrats have got the political power to, you know, avoid holding votes or even hearings on these things. And yes, they disagree with the policy outcomes that the initiatives would produce. But it's a penny wise and pound foolish strategy to try to not talk about them at all. That is exactly what is causing so many people to want to sign these and to want to support them, because they're feeling not listened to and left behind. And I think a much better approach would be, from their standpoint, to hold hearings. You know, go out and campaign on these come election time and argue to the public why they shouldn't be passed. But to try to suppress debate, to go out of your way to avoid a public hearing, to try to game the system, change the rules of the game partway through. One member of the House Democrat leadership yesterday just introduced House Bill 2459 that would change how these initiatives are written up on the ballot itself. Anyway, changing the rules mid-game and avoiding public hearings is what is making these people feel so frustrated in the first place. Discuss the ideas and win people over on the ideas, not through strong-arm politics.
Okay, now we'll go to closing remarks from the Republican leaders, starting with Representative Stokesbury.
Well, maybe that's what should have been my closing remark. We started this talking a little bit about the three initiatives so far, and that's not a bad way to end it. I think that the people, you know, several million signed the initiatives, over 400,000 signed each one. People just want to feel heard. So we should hold hearings and invite the folks to come testify on these initiatives, and make the case to the legislature. You know, but beyond that, the legislature ought to be focused on fixing these crises facing Washington, fixing the fact that we have the fewest law enforcement officers per capita, fixing the fact that over half of our K-12 students are failing math and reading standards, fixing the fact that childcare is one of the most 10 least affordable states for childcare. Fix the fact that we had the highest increase in fentanyl deaths of any state in the country last year. Fix the fact that we've got between the highest and third highest gas prices in the country right now. Unfortunately, the majority party just wants to keep marching down the same road and making problems worse, avoiding hearings on some of the initiatives that would fix these problems, banning natural gas in the middle of winter. It's time for a change. These crises will continue unless there's change in Olympia, and House Republicans want to fix what's broken in Washington.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think that first, thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it, and we've had some great questions, a little bit of homework, and I appreciate that too, on a few bills that we weren't yet familiar with, but we'll go figure it out and make sure we're prepared. But I would just repeat a couple things. One is our priorities. And again, we don't come up with those ourselves. We get them by listening to the people we represent. They're focused on, keeping themselves and their families, their communities safe, public safety. They're focused on being able to afford to live here in Washington State, and they're focused on making sure their kids have the education, the opportunities we think they all deserve. And on our efforts are to in any way we can reasonably do so is to support those top priorities. And we talked a lot about initiatives, and the initiatives, in my view, fall right in line. Public safety. They have an opportunity to back up and rethink the pursuit issue and line up with the other 49 states on a reasonable suspicion. On affordability, we have the opportunity to step back from significant new taxes, in particular the cap and tax program that's making Washington that much more unaffordable for many working Washingtonians. On education, we have the opportunity to initiative. I think we will have the opportunity to initiative to involve parents more in the education of their students. These are the things that people are talking about. These are the things we have in front of us or will have in front of us likely in the form of an initiative of the legislature. These are the things we should be focused on and talking about. And I'll repeat something that Representative Stokesbury said. Republicans are 100% committed to hearing these issues, debating the right solutions and proposing our ideas because we think we have good ideas to make the lives of Washingtonians better, and we're happy to defend them. I'll stop there.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you again next Tuesday.